The lazy August heat hung heavy over Portage, Wisconsin, a small city nestled along the banks of the Wisconsin River. The water flowed languidly, carrying with it the secrets of countless summers past. For most residents, it was just another ordinary day in their quiet Midwestern lives. But for Jake Pearson, an avid magnet fisher, this sweltering Saturday would mark the beginning of a chilling mystery that would shake the very foundations of their close-knit community. Jake had taken up magnet fishing as a hobby during the pandemic, finding solace in the methodical search for metallic treasures beneath the river's surface. He'd pulled up everything from old bicycle parts to Civil War-era relics, each discovery fueling his passion for this unusual pastime. As he cast his powerful neodymium magnet into the murky waters near the Highway 33 bridge, he felt the familiar tug of something substantial. "Got another one," he muttered to himself, grinning with anticipation. The weight on the other end of his rope was considerable, and Jake's mind raced with possibilities. Could it be an old safe, a cache of antique tools, or perhaps even a motorcycle like the one his buddy Travis had pulled from Lake Michigan last year? Sweat beaded on Jake's forehead as he strained against the weight, slowly but surely dragging his find towards the shore. As the object broke the surface, Jake's excitement peaked. An old iron barrel, its metal corroded but still intact, emerged from the depths. The barrel was sealed tight, adding to the mystery of its contents. "Jackpot," Jake whispered, his voice trembling with excitement. He imagined the barrel filled with Prohibition-era moonshine or maybe even gold coins from some long-forgotten robbery. With shaking hands, he began to work on opening the barrel, his mind ablaze with the potential treasures within. The lid came free with a sickening pop, and immediately Jake knew something was terribly wrong. The stench that assailed his nostrils was unmistakable, the putrid odor of death and decay. Peering inside, his eyes widened in horror at the sight of decomposed human remains. Jake stumbled back, his phone already in his hand as he dialed 911 with trembling fingers. I need to report a body," he stammered to the dispatcher, his voice cracking with shock and disbelief. Within minutes, the peaceful riverbank transformed into a bustling crime scene. Yellow police tape cordoned off the area as local law enforcement and forensic teams descended upon the grisly discovery. Detective Nancy Holloway, a veteran of the Portage Police Department, took charge of the scene, her keen eyes surveying every detail. As the summer sun began to set, casting long shadows across the crime scene, the barrel and its grim contents were carefully removed and transported to the State Crime Lab in Madison. The investigation was just beginning, but already Detective Holloway sensed that this case would be unlike any other in her career. Days turned into weeks as forensic experts meticulously examined the remains. The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday morning when Detective Holloway received the call she'd been both anticipating and dreading. "We've got a DNA match," the lab technician informed her, his voice tense with the weight of the revelation. "The remains belong to Dorothy Duncan, reported missing 2 years ago." The name hit Holloway like a physical blow. Dorothy Duncan, a 32-year-old elementary school teacher beloved by her students and colleagues alike. She had vanished without a trace in the summer 2 years prior, leaving behind a devastated family and a community in shock. As Holloway hung up the phone, she knew that the real work was just beginning. The mystery of the barrel in the river had a name now, and with it came a solemn promise to uncover the truth behind Dorothy Duncan's tragic fate and bring her killer to justice. Little did Detective Holloway know that this case would unravel a web of lies, betrayal, and long-buried secrets that would shake Portage to its very core. The quiet waters of the Wisconsin River had given up one secret, but many more still lurked beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered. The identification of Dorothy Duncan's remains as the body in the barrel sent ripples through the Portage Police Department. Detective Nancy Holloway found herself staring at the victim's file, trying to piece together the life of a woman who seemed to have left little trace in the world. Initial investigations painted a picture of isolation. Dorothy, at 43, had no children, no husband, and no parents, having grown up in a children's home. Her solitary existence made the task of finding potential suspects or motives challenging. Who could have wanted her dead, and why go to such lengths to conceal her body? Just as the investigation threatened to stall, a breakthrough came. Records revealed that Dorothy had a sister, Sandra Hart, living not far from Dorothy's house. The discovery injected new life into the case, offering a potential window into the victim's life. Sandra Hart, 40, was called in for questioning. In the interview room, she appeared both relieved that her sister had been found and horrified by the circumstances. Sandra's revelations painted a picture of Dorothy's life that centered primarily around work. She mentioned that Dorothy would occasionally meet up with men from Tinder, suggesting that she might have become involved with someone dangerous through the app. With no other immediate family to question, the investigators turned their attention to Sandra's husband, Billy Hart, 45. He claimed, "We got along well with Dorothy," he said, his voice steady. "She was always welcome in our house. We had a great relationship." He paused, considering his words carefully. "Maybe it's because we had a relationship in the past, even were married, but there was never any bad blood between us." Billy's disclosure unfolded a complex family history. He and Dorothy had been high school sweethearts, marrying when he was 20 and Dorothy was 18. After 5 years, they divorced. Billy then started dating Sandra, and a year later, they had a baby. When asked about Dorothy's reaction to this turn of events, Billy leaned forward, his eyes earnest, and said that their divorce was by mutual agreement and wasn't a problem at all. He went on to describe how Dorothy had fallen in love with her nephew at first sight when she first held him, seemingly accepting the new family dynamic without resentment. As Billy's interview concluded, Detective Holloway found herself grappling with the implications of this tangled family history. The case that had initially seemed straightforward, a possibly lonely woman with no connections, had transformed into something far more complex. The revelation of Dorothy's past marriage to her sister's husband cast everything in a new light. Could there have been lingering resentments or hidden conflicts within this unconventional family unit? Was Billy's account of an amicable separation and Dorothy's acceptance of his new relationship with her sister truly accurate? As the investigation continued, startling news arrived from the laboratory examining Dorothy Duncan's remains. The forensic team's report sent shockwaves through the Portage Police Department. Not only had they found Dorothy's bones in the barrel, but they also discovered the remains of another human alongside hers. Their analysis revealed that Dorothy had been approximately 5 months pregnant at the time of her death. The other bones found in the barrel belonged to her unborn child. This news struck everyone involved in the case. The pregnancy was entirely unexpected given Dorothy's age of 43 and her apparently solitary lifestyle. It added a new layer of complexity to an already puzzling case, raising questions about who the father might be and how this might relate to her death. As Detective Holloway processed this new information, she realized there was one more family member who hadn't been interviewed yet: Tommy Hart, the 20-year-old son of Sandra and Billy. As Dorothy's nephew, Tommy was now the last blood relative who hadn't been questioned about her disappearance and death. The investigation team prepared to bring Tommy in for questioning. They hoped he might provide additional insights into his aunt's life, her pregnancy, and potentially the identity of the second set of remains found in the barrel. As they awaited Tommy's arrival, the team couldn't help but wonder what new revelations this interview might bring to the increasingly complex case of Dorothy Duncan. The interview room at the Portage Police Department felt unusually cold as Tommy Hart, 20, settled into the chair across from Detective Nancy Holloway. His fingers tapped nervously on the table, eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route. "Thank you for coming in, Tommy," Holloway began, her voice calm and steady. "We just have a few questions about your Aunt Dorothy. I understand you two were close." Tommy nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. "Yeah, we were. Aunt Dorothy was special." "Can you tell me about your relationship with her? What kind of things did you do together?" Tommy's posture relaxed slightly as he delved into childhood memories. "When I was a kid, I loved staying at her place. She'd make these amazing apple pies and we'd watch cartoons together for hours. It was like having a cool older sister, you know?" Holloway nodded encouragingly, jotting down notes. "That sounds lovely. Did you continue to spend time with her as you got older?" "Yeah, we stayed close. She was always there for me, especially during my teenage years when things got tough with my parents." As Tommy spoke, Detective Holloway noticed a subtle shift in his demeanor. His words remained positive, but tension crept into his shoulders, and a faint sheen of sweat appeared on his forehead. "Tommy," Holloway said gently, "we've learned some new information about your Aunt Dorothy. Did you know she was pregnant when she died?" The effect was immediate and startling. Tommy's face drained of color, his eyes widening in shock. Before he could stop himself, he blurted out, "How did you know?" The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Holloway and her partner exchanged a quick glance, their suspicions suddenly crystallizing into a disturbing new reality. "Tommy," Holloway said carefully, "your reaction suggests you knew about the pregnancy. Can you tell us how you found out?" Panic flashed across Tommy's face as he realized his mistake. I just assumed, because what, Tommy?" Holloway pressed gently but firmly. "We need you to be honest with us. What do you know about your aunt's pregnancy?" Tommy's breathing quickened, his eyes darting between the two detectives. "I can't. You don't understand. It's not what you think." "Then help us understand, Tommy. We're just trying to figure out what happened to your aunt. If you know something, now is the time to tell us." The tension in the room was palpable as Tommy wrestled with his thoughts. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "You'll think I'm a monster." "We're not here to judge you, Tommy," Holloway assured him. "We just want the truth. Whatever it is, it's better to get it out now." Tommy took a deep, shuddering breath, and then, like a dam breaking, the words began to pour out. "It started when I was 17, he began, his voice trembling. "Aunt Dorothy, she started acting different around me. When we'd say goodbye, she'd kiss me on the lips instead of the cheek. She'd touch me in ways that felt wrong but exciting." Holloway kept her face neutral, encouraging Tommy to continue. "One day after I started college, Mom asked me to drop off some papers at Aunt Dorothy's house. I was waiting in the living room when she came out in this lacy lingerie. She just took it off, right there in front of me." Tommy's face flushed with shame as he recounted the details of that first encounter, how they had engaged in mutual masturbation, fulfilling his fantasy of being with an older woman. "After that, it was like we couldn't stop," Tommy continued, his words coming faster now. "We'd sneak around at family gatherings, find excuses to be alone. We had sex everywhere, in the woods, in bathroom stalls at my college, even in my parents' car and bed when they were out." Holloway and her partner listened in stunned silence as Tommy laid bare the extent of his relationship with his aunt. The young man's shoulders shook with silent sobs as he reached the crux of his confession. "A few months after, Aunt Dorothy told me she was pregnant. She said it was mine." The revelation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Holloway took a moment to process this information before asking, "What happened then, Tommy?" "I freaked out," Tommy admitted. I loved Aunt Dorothy, but a baby, I'm only 20. I told her we couldn't keep it, but she insisted she was going to have the baby. She said she'd figure something out, that maybe we could run away together." "Did anyone else know about your relationship or the pregnancy?" Tommy shook his head. "I told my best friend about us. I was so scared, I didn't know what to do." As Tommy's story unfolded, the detectives began to see the full picture of the tragedy that had befallen Dorothy Duncan. What had initially seemed like a straightforward murder case had transformed into a complex web of forbidden love, family secrets, and desperate choices. "Tommy," Holloway said gently, "I need to ask you a difficult question. Did you have anything to do with your aunt's death?" Tommy's head snapped up, his eyes wide with horror. "No, God, no, I could never. I loved her. I was terrified of the truth coming out, but I would never hurt her. Never." "Can you tell us where you were the night she disappeared?" Tommy nodded, wiping his eyes. "I was at a study group at the college library. There were at least 5 other people there." "Thank you for your honesty, Tommy," she said as they prepared to leave the room. "We'll need to verify some of the information you've given us. In the meantime, I'd advise you not to leave town. We may have more questions for you." Tommy nodded numbly, the weight of his confession visible in the slump of his shoulders. As he left the station, Holloway turned to her partner. "Well, that certainly complicates things," she said with a sigh. Sandra and Billy Hart were brought back in for questioning, this time separately. The detectives decided to start with Sandra, hoping that as Dorothy's sister, she might have some insight into the situation. As Sandra settled into the interview room, Holloway noticed the dark circles under her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands. Whatever secrets she had been keeping, they were clearly taking their toll. "Mrs. Hart," Holloway began, "we've uncovered some new information about your sister and we need to ask you some difficult questions." Sandra nodded wearily. "I'll do my best to help. What do you need to know?" "Were you aware that your sister was pregnant at the time of her death?" Sandra's reaction was immediate and visceral. Her face paled and her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh God," she whispered. "Tommy broke down and told you. Oh crap." Detective Holloway leaned forward, her interest piqued by Sandra's reaction. "Mrs. Hart, what exactly do you know about your sister's pregnancy?" Sandra's composure crumbled as she realized her mistake. She attempted to backtrack. I didn't know for sure. It was just a suspicion." The investigators continued their dialogue with Sandra, gradually bringing her to the truth. Despite her initial attempts to avert suspicion, Sandra eventually became confused in her words and made a startling admission. "A teacher at the college told me she overheard Tommy talking to a friend about a pregnancy," Sandra confessed, her composure crumbling. "They mentioned some girl named Dorothy," a teacher said to Sandra. Sandra's world seemed to collapse as she realized the full implications of what was happening. She questioned the teacher, asking if it was definitely Dorothy and if she was certain that Tommy was the father. "The teacher confirmed it," Sandra continued, her voice shaking. "She said she was concerned but didn't want to get Tommy and his girlfriend in trouble, so she decided to tell us as Tommy's parents." Sandra explained that she thanked the teacher and went home without telling anyone else. "I was furious and shocked," she admitted. After that, I secretly went through Tommy's phone and saw the messages. They confirmed that Dorothy and Tommy were having an affair. The investigators then asked if Sandra knew anything about Dorothy's murder. Sandra's face contorted with anger. "That bitch deserved everything that happened to her," she spat. When asked if she was involved in the murder, Sandra deflected, saying, "Dorothy couldn't forgive Billy for leaving her for me. She cursed me and said I took away her happiness." The investigators pressed further, asking about Dorothy and Billy's divorce. Sandra's response was shockingly candid. "Dorothy couldn't satisfy her husband in bed," she said. "I offered him what he wanted. I gave him my a-hole, and after that, we met in secret and fulfilled different fantasies. Dorothy caught us and divorced Billy." At this point, Billy, who was sitting next to Sandra, blushed deeply and lowered his eyes in shame. Sandra continued, "Time passed, and at one point Dorothy became very friendly. We became friends again. We thought Dorothy had forgiven us until I found out the news about her pregnancy. The bitch had been plotting her revenge for a long time and wanted to hit me where it hurt." Sandra's voice grew cold as she concluded, "I was furious, so I took Dorothy for a walk." Sandra's voice was hollow as she continued her confession, recounting the events of that fateful day. "We were walking on the bridge," Sandra said, her eyes unfocused as if reliving the moment. "I asked her why she did this, why she seduced my son. He's her blood nephew, for God's sake." Sandra's face contorted with anger as she recalled Dorothy's response. She laughed. She actually laughed and said, "Tommy's quite talented in bed. You raised a good son. Get ready to become a grandmother. Tommy's going to have a son soon." The investigators remained silent, allowing Sandra to continue her story. "I called her an old pervert," Sandra admitted. "That's when she got angry. She said, 'You took my life from me. I wanted to live with Billy and have children. Did you think I would forgive you for this so easily? I've chained Tommy to myself. He loves me very much and will not leave me. Your perfect family is ruined, so now live with this bitch.'" Sandra's hands clenched into fists as she recounted the next moments. "After those words, I pushed her off the bridge. She fell to the ground. Dorothy's death was immediate." The room fell silent as the weight of Sandra's confession settled over everyone present. After a moment, Sandra continued, her voice eerily calm. "It wasn't a random act," she explained. "It was a thought-out move. Under the bridge, there was already an iron barrel waiting, what I called the coffin for Dorothy. I had left it nearby earlier. After she fell, I placed Dorothy in the box, closed it, and the next day I took it out to the river. I thought no one would ever find her again." As Sandra finished her confession, the investigators exchanged glances, the full extent of the tragedy finally coming into focus. The case that had begun with a mysterious barrel in the river had unraveled into a tangled web of family secrets, betrayal, and premeditated murder. In the months that followed Sandra's confession, the small town of Portage, Wisconsin was thrust into the national spotlight. The sensational details of the case, involving incest, adultery, and premeditated murder, captivated the public's attention and divided the community. The trial of Sandra Hart began on a crisp autumn morning almost exactly 2 years after Dorothy Duncan's body had been discovered in the Wisconsin River. The courthouse was packed, with journalists from across the country vying for seats in the gallery. Over the course of 2 weeks, the prosecution laid out its case, presenting evidence of Sandra's premeditation, including the purchase of the iron barrel and her careful planning of the confrontation on the bridge. They also delved into the complex family dynamics that led to the tragic event, painting a picture of jealousy, betrayal, and revenge. Sandra's defense team attempted to portray her as a victim of circumstances, a woman pushed to the brink by her sister's betrayal and the destruction of her family. They argued for a lesser charge of manslaughter, claiming that Sandra had acted in the heat of passion. Tommy Hart, looking pale and withdrawn, took the stand as a key witness. His testimony about his relationship with his Aunt Dorothy sent shockwaves through the courtroom and left many jurors visibly disturbed. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. Sandra Hart was found guilty of second-degree murder. At the sentencing hearing, the judge addressed Sandra directly. "Mrs. Hart, the events that led to this tragedy are almost beyond comprehension. While the court acknowledges the complex circumstances that brought you to this point, the premeditated nature of your actions cannot be overlooked. You not only took a life, but also destroyed your own family in the process." Sandra was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. In the aftermath of the trial, the Hart family was left in tatters. Billy Hart filed for divorce and moved away from Portage, unable to face the whispers and stares of his neighbors. Tommy Hart, struggling with guilt and trauma, dropped out of college and entered intensive therapy. The case left a lasting impact on the town of Portage. It served as a stark reminder of the destructive power of secrets and the devastating consequences of unchecked jealousy and revenge. Detective Nancy Holloway, who had led the investigation, found herself deeply affected by the case. In the years that followed, she became an advocate for victims of familial abuse, using the lessons learned from the Hart case to help others. As for the Wisconsin River, it continued its timeless flow, its waters now hiding one less secret. The tragic tale of Dorothy Duncan and the Hart family became a somber local legend, a cautionary tale whispered about for generations to come. In the end, there were no real winners in the case of the barrel in the river. Only broken lives, shattered families, and a community left to grapple with the knowledge that sometimes the greatest dangers lurk not in the shadows of strangers, but in the hearts of those closest to us.